bits and then make it available later. Okay. So now let's go back to, where were we? Here we go. So we left off, I was trying to rush through the theories and realized we weren't going to get done in time. So researchers have been studying the effects of communication in general, since the early 20th century. And they have also then included sports communication. And one of the fields of theories is that the media is very powerful, and none of us would deny that. It is powerful. It does influence us. Whether or not we acknowledge it, whether or not we think it does, the media influences us in many ways. But in the early 20th century, before a lot of research had occurred in terms of the mass media, some researchers said it had unlimited power to pretty much change us, just like taking a shot of medicine would. We got to that theory, that audiences are kind of overwhelmed by the power and persuasive authority of medias. But the hypodermic needle or magic bullet theory, that the media is just as powerful as a bullet that penetrates, that's been dismissed. The media, we're not that weak-minded, and they're not that powerful that they have unlimited power over us, but they are strong. And so researchers still try to research the effects, but they no longer think that it's sort of kind of unlimited power wielding over the public. There's another group of theories that talks about the uses and gratification that kind of challenge this powerful effects assumption, that the audience seeks the mass media for specific purposes, individual characteristics, social categories, relationships. And so we do have some power over the mass media because we seek it out to use it as we deem fit and to satisfy different gratifications that we have. I don't know about you guys, but I've watched a whole lot more Netflix in the last week than I normally do because I work, I'm at home, and then when I'm not working, I have nothing else to do. I guess I could read a book. That's a sad commentary, but it's not like I can go out and see friends. We're all kind of stuck in the snow. And so I've used Netflix as kind of socialization while I'm waiting to be able to go out and see people. A couple other theories that are important. One is the notion that the effect of the media or effect of things that we accept as a society are brought to us by the media. It's called the two-step flow. And the notion is that the audience is receptive to and willing to adopt new innovations, but it's usually brought to us by a second party. It's brought to us by the media, and then we can accept it. The diffusion of innovation theory has to do with how quickly we accept things. Some people are quick to adopt new technologies, and some people are slow to adopt. So the diffusion of innovation theory talks about how the media helps persuade us more quickly, among other things, to accept things. Then when it comes to sports, some researchers deal with parasocial and circumsocial interaction. It's like, what? Those are words you don't use every day. But the notion is that there's a sense of relationship with the media that builds a community. It creates bonds of intimacy through mediated communications. And so there's a social circumstance related to that. Example would be, pick whatever your sport is or whatever your team is. And if you're a this fan or a that fan, you have a sense of community. If you're from a certain area, maybe you grew up with a team or a sport, and that there's a sense of community about that. A couple other theories that are really important is agenda setting and framing. agenda setting came along, and a couple researchers said that, the media is not so powerful that it can tell you what to think. It's not like you turn something on and you instantly adopt the thought processes of whatever you're watching, but it can tell you what to think about. So if you think about the news media, for instance, they may not tell you exactly what to think. You don't listen to, whatever news organization you listen to and instantly change your thoughts. But through the gatekeeping process, the news does put on certain stories and leave certain stories out. So they tell you what stories to think about. And then by the collection of facts that they do, they tell you how to think about those stories. So this is one of the more powerful theories that is accurate, that the media can't tell you what to think, but it can tell you what to think about. And that's very, very powerful. Framing is the notion that there's a story out there, but I'm going to put out the facts that I want to frame the story as I want you to see it. It's sort of like spin, only it's a more sophisticated notion than spin, but it's the power of telling people what to think about a particular story. I know this stuff is hard on a Thursday morning, but bear with me. We'll get through the theories here in a minute. They're important to know because when you become a communicator, one of the things that you will do is you will frame your franchise's story. There's a lot of that going on now post Super Bowl. There's a lot of that going on in the NBA and different arenas where they're framing the story. So that's why these things will come in handy. And we are going through them pretty fast because you do have the textbook as a backup. There's a couple other children or people who are more easily persuaded, and that's the modeling. That's where audience members can model their behavior from messages they receive from the media. And so I think there's a very famous quote. I didn't look it up before class, but I think it wasn't Charles Barkley who once said, "I'm not a role model, I play basketball." Well, I get what he was saying there, but actually he is a role model, whether he wants to be or not. And so this whole notion, in particular in sports, that if you're, a top athlete, people are going to model what you do, particularly if you're talking about children. And so the whole notion of modeling people's behavior. Cultivation theory is sort of the idea of the mechanics of how you get an audience to make certain decisions based on information. So in this case, as sports communicators, you want to cultivate a fan base and an audience. And so this theory could be very helpful for that. Okay, before I move off of that, does anybody have any questions out there? Okay. It's weird having class this way, but we'll get through it. Because I can't see your faces or your interactions, but those are those theories in a nutshell. So then the book goes in to talking about in chapter 4, intra and interpersonal communication, which we've already touched on earlier in the chapter. And believe it or not, some of this stuff is in chapter 5 as well. But intrapersonal communication is very important for you to understand that that's when you communicate with yourself. It's internal communication. It's not when you're communicating with a friend, or you're communicating with yourself. And we all do it. And it's hard to, study it per se because it's a private thing. But we all do it in terms of how we process decisions and that kind of thing. And we can have mediated intrapersonal communication sometimes through something we might reveal on social media. You post something that was a private thought, but now it's all of a sudden it's a public thought because you shared it with, your 5,000 friends or how many friends you have. Interpersonal communication is between more than one person. It's a two flow of information, I speak, you speak, I speak, you speak between individuals, which is kind of why Zoom is kind of difficult because there's not a give and take on Zoom too much. Interpersonal communication can also be small groups, and it can be bigger groups as well. And so it's usually can be a small group of people who are in proximity to each other. And so knowing the difference between these two concepts is important. Hold on just a second, I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm getting a message I need to respond to. I would not normally do this. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So a lot of communication in sports is that which is mediated through the news media. It is different elements of the sports media that bring us different messages. And they're conducted through a myriad of mass media and social media endeavors. Sports mass media, television, radio, internet, social media, things like YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, and then intermass communication. And so there's a lot of different ways that the communication is mediated for us from the Chiefs or the Bucks or the Cardinals or the Royals to the fan base through the mass media. There's a lot of different sport communication services, integrated marketing communication. We've already kind of talked about that. This stuff is kind of a repeat from chapter 1 a little bit. PR and crisis comm in sports. Or you have crisis communication when one of your athletes or coaches does something that they shouldn't, or just something happens you can't control. I remember Brett Favre's last year in the NFL. He was playing for the Vikings, and they had so much snow, the stadium's roof fell in. And so some crisis communication is not your fault, but you still have to deal with it. Sports communication research is really big too. So these are kind of areas I feel like we've touched on before a little bit, talking about these sport communication services. I did want to play for you just a kind of a brief video I thought was pretty good about sort of an accurate picture of the media and sports communication. And I kind of tried it out before you all logged on, and it did seem to be working. So I'm going to go ahead and log this on, and please don't leave me. Keep listening to this, and then we will. I think we're done after this one, and we will pick up Chapter 5's PowerPoint. So let's listen to this, and then we will, continue on.
I do have a definite memory from the time. I was just throwing out positive energy.
You guys hear that okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Everything seemed to freeze in time.
It goes beyond what you could reasonably have prepared.
Even before he struck it, I think I was ready to go.
I knew when he took a touch, he would score.
Aguero!
Just staggering! Sergio Aguero has done it! I don't believe what I'm seeing! They're all banging each other! They got love fights and everything!
I don't even know where that come from. I mean, it was a scream and half.
This is going to be a moment that I'll remember to my dying day.
This script just could not become any more extraordinary. Have my eyes actually got this right?
I swear you'll never see anything like this ever again!
We'll skip this ad.
I've been around this football club in its various guises for a long period of time now, and that phrase that I'd heard a few times, I heard it a lot that morning. It could be typical City, meaning they've built us up and they'll let us down.
City and United are level on points. City have got to win, pretty much in the knowledge that United will win their game at Sunderland.
My heart of hearts said Manchester City are too good. All they had to do was beat Queen's Park Rangers at home. Easy.
City's fans knew deep down that this was the most winnable of winnable home games.
I thought there were certainties. I thought it was an absolute given. The press stewards at City are always very sort of welcoming, but they are just die-hard Blues, and you'd shake their hands and look them in the eye and wish them luck, and you could just see the nerves.
It was completely full. There were people who'd been turned away, journalists from all over the world.
And you look round and you see the heavyweights have come in from Gazzetta dello Sport in Italy or L'Equipe in France.
A lot of people wrote material, obviously not knowing Manchester City and their history, and started to write their reports before the game.
Welcome along to Squeaky Bum Sunday. The last day of the Premier League season. Queen's Park Rangers obviously had an issue. They weren't just here making up the numbers on the last day of the season. They were playing to stay in the Premier League. In terms of the ability of the two teams, you would have thought that City would win in a reasonably straightforward fashion.
Goodness me, it was the most unstraightforward afternoon that you're ever likely to watch in any sport in all of your life.
44 years, 22 changes of manager, 5 relegations and 5 promotions. Manchester City stand on the edge of glory again. Manchester City will become only the 5th different name on the Roll of Honour if they beat Queen's Park Rangers.
There will be tears. You know there will be tears.
I knew it before I was told it. I knew it from the fans around me.
No goals. There has been one on Weir side.
Manchester United laid pressure on Manchester City. Only against Queen's Park Rangers at home, but it's goalless at the moment. Warrior, that's the word that always comes to mind about Pablo.
I don't think there could have been a more popular scorer.
It's Amaleta! Where's it going to drop? Is it? The mood changes from desperation to delight.
You could sense there was people were starting to believe, but always you still feel that there are City fans around who are thinking, how is this all going to go wrong? It's got to go wrong somehow.
It is half-time. It is engrossing, undulating, entirely absorbing.
At half-time, I did speak to some of the spectators behind us, and they were not ready to party just yet.
Because of the immediacy of deadlines, and especially now in a digital age, you usually, especially for a Sunday game or an evening game, you have to start writing your report during the game. I probably started at half-time to dare to start writing the glory stuff.
A cup of tea and a biscuit, and on we go.
Manchester City 45 minutes away, barring mishaps.
Where we are in the press box, you're amongst the fans, which is brilliant. So they were turning around all the time, partly for updates on what was happening with Manchester United, partly because they didn't want to see what unfolded in that extraordinary moment when QPR, who were fighting for their lives, got back into it.
Queen's Park Rangers hadn't read the script.
I can remember almost hearing a...
The Cisse seesaw.
Cisse scores for Queen's Park Rangers! That just was not meant to happen!
We're suddenly tipping back the other way, and the instinctive pessimism of City fans kicks in again.
The anxiety around that stadium is hard to find the words to describe it, but you could tangibly feel it.
It is agony. It's the rule of football. Before the ecstasy, if it is to come, there has to be a period of agony.
The whole tension clearly got to the QPR players as well as City's, and it got to him more than anything. Maybe even thinking deep down, I could have been a part of this, and it never worked out for me.
Obviously, connections here. It wasn't pretty.
Joey Barton stares controversy in the face again.
He's handed Manchester City a title chance. But also there was that nagging feeling that if any club could fail to beat a 10-man group of strugglers without a prayer, it was going to be City because of their history. But this was a major moment in their favour.
I've given up trying to predict anything in football.
This couldn't happen, could it? Down to 10 men.
It put the cat amongst the pigeons here, didn't it, really?
Mackey! Jamie Mackie has sent Manchester City towards heartbreak on the final day of the season. It is typical City.
Typical City. I had that phrase in my mind.
It's Mackie scored! And Man City fans, you cannot believe it, Jeff.
I've talked to Man City fans since when I've been up and down the country, and they left. Some of them left the ground too.
But a tears already. It isn't done yet, boy.
When you're working for the club's commentary channel and you're trying to not be biased, but with an emphasis on the club, you are trying to stay positive. But when Mackie scores, the place was completely deflated.
You couldn't help but feel for these fans who turned up expecting to have a party.
The look of pending heartache amongst some of the City fans in front of us was clear. I mean, I saw this woman who walked out, and I described her, possibly a bit unfairly, looking like she just staggered out of a car crash.
But at this point, I was literally in full flow, writing my report about how there just seems to be something about the club, almost as if it's cursed.
I think the last few minutes of the game, a lot of the tension had disappeared. And that might have been what helped the players on the field, because most of the fans sitting around us were thinking, well, that's it then.
I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, this is going to fizzle out. And then Charlie said to me, Charlie, Nick and Tomo said, what do you reckon? What do you reckon? And I said, there'll be drama. There'll definitely be drama in this game. Something's going to happen.
The injury time, or Fergie time, as I called it, was just one of the most unbelievable passages of play I've ever witnessed.
Then all of a sudden the corner come over.
Silva whips it in.
I love my Squarespace site's simple and beautiful design.
Header! Goal! It's 2-1! And Dzeko! And they run back to the final trip! When Dzeko's header hits the net, your first response is to look at your watch. 4 minutes to save themselves! 4 minutes to find their crown!
I remember saying to my producer, who did get a little bit excited, I remember saying, well, this is City, that just makes it worse.
The tiniest little bit of hope. It's the hope that's been killing them for years.
The other subplot, of course, was the news was coming through to QPR, and they were getting calls directly to the bench. One of their backroom staff had gone to the game that affected their relegation issue.
QPR were out on their feet. They had nothing left. There were only 10 of them. And what's more, fairly early in stoppage time, they learnt that they were safe. So, in a sense, they were now a sitting duck.
I'm not saying for one moment that it affected their concentration, but somebody might argue that.
And I remember QPR got the ball and they kicked it in the corner. They literally kicked it in the corner, and they all run back to the edge of the box.
It's now come down effectively to goal. It was all down to individuals taking responsibility. And Balotelli has had some criticism. I've slagged him off on many an occasion for some of the daft things that he's done. I tell you what, that was a great pass to Aguero.
It's finished at Sunderland.
Tony Mills was the match director, who's I've worked with actually for most of the years that I've been in television. And his talent for keeping calm at a moment like that, because it's not just what was happening here. We have the pictures at Sunderland as well.
Manchester United have done all they can. That Rooney goal was enough for the 3 points.
To have the shots, the split screen of the United players that much away from winning another Premier League title. And then we came back from that to the moment Balotelli got the ball.
Manchester City is still alive here.
It was a Hollywood feature film made with all the advantages of high tech doing it after the event. You couldn't have got it better, and Tony got it absolutely spot on. And then the roof fell in. Really.
Aguero!
You get asked sometimes, "Oh, did you have that ready to say?" And I go, "How on earth could you imagine a scenario like that?" After I said Aguero, with a lot of O's on the end, there is a period of silence. That's partly down because I think pictures tell the story better than words, but also Mark Hughes told me the next night it's the noisiest moment in a football ground he'd ever experienced. So that sort of, I think, had some effect on, that noise was in my ears, not just in the stadium, but we had the crowd effects in our ears as well.
Watch it! Drink it in! They've just told the news at the stadium of light!
I see that goal in slow motion. I never see it in real time anymore.
It's Sergio Aguero! Manchester City winner!
The Aguero, I can't even do it now. People come up to me still and say, when you did the commentary, why did you copy Martin Tyler? And I have to try and explain to them that it's all live. There are still people who think it isn't.
It's a great broadcasting challenge to think on your feet at a time like that. You can have, and I did have, some words sort of knocked together for Manchester City's inevitable trophy lift. But in that moment, you realise that those words just weren't enough.
Aguero! Staggering! Just staggering!
4 seconds earlier, I couldn't have told you that the word I was going to use was staggering, but staggering is what came out.
Where does football go from here?
And that was just an instinctive realisation that it cannot get any more exciting than this.
I can't remember much of what I said at all.
Aguero! He can win it! He's won the title! Surely!
Just, I suppose, went to 10 on the Richter scale, and I think any commentator has the right to do that.
Who is writing this stuff?
I'll be honest, when Aguero scored the winner, I didn't have a clue what I said.
It runs for Aguero! They did it! City win the title! I don't believe what I'm seeing!
You were trying to keep your voice in check from breaking or saying something truly insane.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like it in my life.
Manchester United are seconds away from the title. Wayne Rooney got the It's a chance! It's a chance!
The next day, my reaction was shown, I don't know how many times, on Sky News and then on the internet.
Incredible! Oh my God! He's never seen anything like it. He's got a plan!
You'd have thought I was a Man City fan all my life. No, I was just doing my job, and I love football, and it was just a special moment.
Press box, people are looking around, few fairly lively words going around. I mean, the age of Twitter, it had already started, so people sort of already sort of pouring a reaction out on social media, but I'm not sure 140 characters could quite do that moment justice. You probably need 140,000 words in a book.
When something like that happens, it still hits you at a gut level. The wow factor of that is unbelievable. Then you think, I've got a lot of writing to do here. I had to delete almost all of what I'd just written. They expected my match report within 5 minutes of the final whistle.
And I looked round at some of the foreign journalists were there, and they were going, "Wow, this is English football." And I remember having a chat with a guy from Gazette and looked at what he'd written the next day. He said, "One day Prince Charles will be King of England. But today, the King of England is Roberto."
There were so many features on that day, which on their own would have made the day remarkable, but in combination took it beyond comic book stuff.
A day many thought would never come.
You don't get titles won with the last kick of the last game in injury time. It doesn't happen. But it did once.
It was really nice of the club to play that to him with my commentary on. I think he thought it was pretty funny how berserk I went.
We're very self-critical of the commentators as a breed, and we don't want to spoil it. We I think.
There was another minute left. I think we kind of get the gist of that, and I wanted to play it for you in part because I thought it was a really good clip that sort of encapsulates everything we're talking about how stories are framed and how they kind of the enthusiasm of the sportscasters and how there's a community built. And it's a little crazy if you look at it objectively, how excited we get about sporting events and how for teams and things like that. And I thought that was a pretty good video. Do you guys have any reactions to it in terms of what you saw and what it tells you about sports communication? It's okay if you don't. Sometimes listening to it. Oh, go ahead, Kennedy. Kennedy, you're muted. Well, maybe you weren't planning to say something, your box lit up. But okay, well, I think that, definitely shows a lot of the different mediated communications and that kind of thing. I think what we'll do now is go on to chapter 5, does anybody have any questions while I'm pulling this up about, oh, there's some in the chat. Hold on a second, everybody. Somebody in the chat, Carly, pointed out we have a university reading day on Tuesday. I would have noticed that eventually and emailed you. I'm glad Carly brought it up, which means we don't meet Tuesday. So even though campus is open, the university decided in lieu of a spring break to give you a couple of reading days. So we're not supposed to have any homework due, or we're not supposed to meet. So we're gonna get a little further behind, but that's okay. We're gonna respect the reading day. And Carly, thanks for pointing that up. So we will probably be back to campus next week, but we as a class won't meet till Thursday. So rest or whatever you need to do on that day. And we may have to move our first test if we're far enough behind. So don't worry about that too much. We'll see where we are next Thursday. And I appreciate that prompt from Carly. And Kennedy was trying to talk to us, but her mic's not working. So that's what was in the chat. So thank you, Kennedy, for wanting to chime in. Let me pull up. Let's see. Try to pull up the PowerPoints and talk to. There we go. Man, it's going to be forever before we meet again in person. But that's okay. We'll abide by the reading day. And I suspect you guys probably already need a break. So I'm glad we have it. Okay, well, let's keep powering through then and talk about chapter 5, personal sport communication. And there's a little bit in this chapter that's a little bit redundant. It talks about inter and intrapersonal again. So we'll go over that real quick, or even maybe skip that part. For chapter 5, these are a few of the things that you need to learn or take away from the chapter. That there are 3 main forms of personal communication in sports. And we have a slide about that we'll get to. There are processes and purposes for both mediated and unmediated interpersonal sport communication. Mediated means when there's a third party. And then this chapter wants you to understand the functions and forms of nonverbal communication in sport. Okay, so there's quite a bit of nonverbal communication in sport. We're going to talk about that. There's also, of course, a lot of verbal communication, and we're going to look at the different functions and levels of that. And then we're going to look at some of the different skills needed for interpersonal sport communication. So those are like 5 of the highlights of this particular chapter. So personal communication in sports. They will be determined by a number of factors. How many communicators are involved, and what's the situation in which they communicate. And so it really depends on how many reporters are there, how many people are there, and then what's the environment, that kind of thing. So personal communication is altered by numbers and environment. Intrapersonal communication, we just talked about. That's primarily conversations you have with yourself when you turn inward and you think about your own mind, or you think about different things, but it's an internal dialogue, and that's been mentioned in the last 3 chapters. So the only thing I would say about that is when you see a concept like that repeatedly, you're probably going to see something on the test about it. Intrapersonal communication is private in nature, so it's really hard to quantify. It's hard for me to know what's in your mind and vice versa. Each of the chapters has at least one of these little profiles. I really enjoy them. Kara Wright is an interesting person. She was director of business operations for a basketball team, the Clippers, although I think hers was not the NBA main league, but a lower level league. But she was very involved with them, and she is now, I believe, at Columbia University as some kind of senior sports person. And she was significant and highlighted because they just wanted to show a woman working in sports, and she's very good at interpersonal communication and talking about that. So her profile talked a lot about different nonverbal cues. And so she's an interesting figure, and she left relatively recently to go into university sports communications, I believe at Columbia. In terms of characterizing intrapersonal communication, again, we all do it. I don't know, maybe you're trying to make a decision where to take an internship or where to go after school, and you might make a pro and a con list. And so the pros of interpersonal communication help heighten self-awareness, self-management, and self-confidence. So this form of communication can help build confidence and make you reflective. Sometimes you do things because you're unaware of your behavior and how they affect others. The cons of interpersonal is sometimes you can overthink things. I do that all the time. I will think something to death and then I overthink it. And that can be detrimental. Sometimes that can even be kind of debilitating if you do it to an extreme. Sometimes it can create misconceptions and you can misinterpret actions. So you want to be careful about overthinking while still maintaining self-reflection. We talked about interpersonal the last chapter. I don't know that I want to go into this too much more because we've talked about it, but they do talk a little bit in this chapter about didactic communications where you have one-on-one interaction, face-to-face interaction. But we've already kind of talked about this. I'm going to skip over this particular slide. It's been in 2 or 3 chapters and we're in the 4th one. Interpersonal is communication between 2 or more people. It's interactive. It occurs face-to-face. And we engage in interpersonal sport communication to relate, to learn, to play, to help others, and to influence. And frankly, there's probably more than that, but those are some that come to mind. And so make sure you know the difference, what interpersonal communication is. Small group communications, like a lot of other terms that you'll have in your classes, is exactly what it sounds like. It's sports communication within a group, a small one. They usually come together around a significant purpose or a common purpose, and they can influence one another. And a small group versus a collection of people. Small groups, the interaction is more intimate, and so whether or not you're in a small group or a large group, the interaction and perceptions are different and that kind of thing. So small groups can vary in size, but at some point, you know, when they get large, it affects those different areas. Any questions? How are we doing on time? We're doing okay on time. There are 6 elements of interpersonal sport communication. We talked about this on Tuesday. The whole source receiver thing. The source is a person who is sending the information to a receiver. One has to encode the message and one has to decode the message. And we kind of went over that, so I'm not going to belabor this particular slide. The messages are the information flow, and they can go up, down, lateral, or grapevine. Up means from maybe, an employee to a boss. Down means a boss to an employee. Lateral might be peer-to-peer, and grapevine is pretty much gossip. And so there's a lot of different channels. There are nonverbal channels in terms of how messages flow too. And then in order to keep the communication going, there's feedback. One person sends a message, feedback's received, and the communication can be ongoing. The channels are the mediums through which we send our messages. In sports, often it is the media that we use. It's the newspaper, it's the TV station, it's the radio. And so it's the means of our communication. And so it can really change different things. But I think we all kind of get the notion of the different channels is how the message is carried. Again, we talked a little bit about this in one of our earlier chapters, that there's noise that can interrupt the communication process. Sometimes it's actual physical noise. If we were in a classroom right now and I was lecturing and there was a jackhammer going and you couldn't hear me, or right now if we lost our Wi-Fi, that would be physical noise that would keep us from communicating. But there's also psychological, physiological, and semantic noise in terms of perceptions and that kind of thing. So noise is what keeps communication from being, well executed, if you will. Something gets in the way to keep the message from getting to the receiver in the manner you intended. Context also can play a role, any relevant surroundings. Anybody watching that clip we just watched, it wouldn't mean as much to them if they weren't up on soccer and didn't know about those teams and the one team that, seems to have a knack for losing until they finally pulled out the end and won. So there was a whole context for that story. People involved in sports communication, the fan or the reporters, they're involved in verbal and nonverbal communications. Hopefully we all know what verbal is. It's speaking, it's writing. Nonverbal or facial expressions, body movements, that kind of thing. This link here from the Huffington Post talks about body language in sport. And I'm going to point, instead of belaboring that so we can kind of move through the chapter, I'm going to point you to that article. It's pretty interesting on how body language acts in sports, how you manage different impressions. There are different functions of nonverbal communication in terms of different things you can do. And that article covers that quite a bit. Sorry, my throat's a little dry. There's different forms of nonverbal communication, your book outlines. I'm not going to read these definitions to you, but these are important terms for you to know. I will point out a couple of them. Haptics is sort of the involvement of physical touching in order to communicate, in order to get a sense of touch. Although there's real rules in physical touching, you have to be careful not to do it inappropriately. But a handshake means camaraderie, or a hug at the end of an important play or something like that. So haptics is sort of that kind of nonverbal communication, but you have to be very careful, especially today, not to touch people against the rules or inappropriately in any way. Kinetics is just the whole use of body motion. I think most people who know about sports know about that. Proxemics is sort of the use of personal and social space. You've heard that you're in my space. And then physical characteristics, I think we all know what those are. Artifacts are things that we use non-verbally to express things in sports. You know, it might be something like, you know, I haven't been there, but I think in front of the Denver Broncos stadium, there's a pretty big statue of John Elway because he's the quarterback that brought them 2 Super Bowl victories. Well, that's an artifact. Or upstairs, I have a bobblehead doll of Willie McGee because he was one of my favorite Cardinals when he played. And so artifacts are those things that remind us of glory days, remind us of athletes, remind us of a shared experience. And that's a very powerful nonverbal communication. Environmental factors can influence the physical setting of places. Vocalics is just sort of the tone and speed and volume with which you speak. That can be very powerful. When you take speech class, they'll teach you about, you know, when to pause and when to pitch and when to crescendo and that kind of thing. Silence can also be a very intimidating form of nonverbal communication. It can convey a lot of different messages. When I used to be a reporter and I'd ask a question, and sometimes people are slow to respond in the interview, some reporters, you know, would feel the need to jump in and ask the other question or help the person because it's uncomfortable or awkward to have silent pauses. I always stayed silent because they would fill the silence with something if I would let them talk. And so silence can be very powerful nonverbal communicator. And chronemics, which I don't think I said that word right, but that's how people, you know, use time and perceive time. I feel like I'm asking almost in vain, but any questions, or you guys, hopefully you guys are still with me. Verbal communication in sports is so important. One thing we noticed in that clip was just the powerful use of language, as well as the excitement in the commentators. And so you use language for many different reasons. I'm not going to read them all to you here, but you know, sometimes you can vent or control your emotions, one or the other. And depending upon the moment, you might need to let loose and, you know, scream if it's the appropriate, you know, moment the team finally wins or that kind of thing. It can help facilitate information, influence, control, persuade. So all of these different 8 functions. Obviously, verbal language, verbal communication is very, very important to sports. So levels of meaning. This is very basic stuff, but the first level of meaning is simply word choice. You hear sometimes people will complain, oh, that's just semantics. That's what I meant. Semantics matter. The word choice that you use matter. You can communicate something completely differently by choosing a particular word. And then the second level is the sentence. So that's multiple words you put together. How you group them and how you put them together really, really matters. And then third, there's sort of how you speak, that the words and sentences, how they interact with each other. And so this is true in the written word as well as the spoken word. But verbal communication in sports, you know, the words matter, the sentences matter, and how they interact matters. These are different interpersonal communication skills that are really, really important. They're all important. I think sensitivity and empathy can make you a really good reporter, or it can probably make you a really good coach or athletic director, because understanding where other people are coming from, I think, is very, very helpful. being able to express yourself well. I can't remember who it was, but a team just named a new NFL coach. And he was kind of a guy, people were surprised he got an NFL coaching job. In his very first press conference, he went on and on and on about how tough the team was going to be. But just saying they were tough, he's like, we're going to chop off your kneecaps, and then we're going to come up and chop off your other kneecap. And he went on, and he sounded a little deranged. He needs to learn better to express himself in the media. I think in order to get along in sports communication, you need a certain level of assertiveness. So these are just important communication skills. You can take from it what you may. There's another good video, and I kind of, on one level, hate to do this to you, but I think it's a really nice way to end is with this video, and then we'll sign off. But they'll stay on because I will have a few comments after this. But this is about youth sports and interpersonal communication.
Your PR team works tirelessly to tell your brand story, but the PR workflow is a mess. It's hard to build a brand image with
Thank you. Every year in the United States, about 40 million children play youth sports. Yet 70% of those kids drop out and quit by the time they're 13 years old. 3 out of 4 children are done with sports before high school. Now, as a person who's been involved in athletics his whole life, as a college and a professional soccer player, and a coach for the last 20 years, I wanted to know, why was this happening? Why do so many kids quit something that has made such a positive impact on my life? And then about 3 years ago, I realized the answer to that question. Standing on the sideline of my 5-year-old daughter Maggie's soccer game. Now, if you've ever seen 5-year-old soccer, it's amazing. This is giant scrum of players, and it moves up and down the field, and there's lots of giggling and laughing. Sometimes a player breaks out and scores in the right goal. Sometimes she kicks in the wrong goal. Twice the chance of success. It doesn't matter, right? She's happy, parents are positive, everyone's supportive, coaches are positive, there's no referee to yell at. This is what sports is supposed to be. Well, on this particular day, there was a 10-year-old boys game right next door. And it should be just the same, right? But it was completely different. It was a competitive 10-year-old boys game. And I say competitive in quotes because it wasn't the kids who were competing harder, it was the adults. A kid makes a bad pass, the ball gets stolen and the other team scores. And then all hell breaks loose. The coach jumps off his bench, he screams at the kid and he yanks him out of the game. Next, his dad is on the other sideline screaming at him. His friend's parents, they're screaming at him. And as I'm watching this, I'm saying to myself, wow, this is exactly why children drop out of sports. Because sports is supposed to be about children playing and children having fun and learning. And none of that is happening here. Now, I want to just invite you for a moment to get into the mindset of a 10-year-old boy or any young athlete today, because it's very, very different than when I was growing up. You go to a game, and you're just going to play a game, but yet so many of the adults, they're acting like it's the World Series. They're acting like it's the NBA Finals, and you're just there to play a game. There's coaches and parents screaming at you from the sidelines. Sometimes they're screaming at you, sometimes they're screaming at the referee, sometimes they're screaming at each other. Now you get in the car after the game, and you just want to relax and emotionally unwind. And yet, this is the time when so many parents choose to deconstruct your game and criticize and critique your performance. Now you sit around your kitchen table and you hear your parents talking about the time and the financial commitment that it takes to play youth sports. Maybe you'll get a scholarship down the line to help pay for all this. And that just adds pressure and stress. And then finally, at the end of the year, the end of the season, when you're ready to move on to another sport, what happens? Your coach sits you down and says, you can't do that. You're not moving on. Because if you're going to stay on this team, you need to play year round. And if you don't, I'm going to give your spot away. This is what so many children feel these days, this type of pressure. And that's why 7 out of 10 of them quit youth sports. 7 out of 10 are done. Now, I call this the great giant race to nowhere in youth sports. And it's a race because so many kids and so many parents were in such a hurry to do more at younger and younger ages. And I say it ends nowhere because while we tend to focus on the few athletes who get a scholarship or turn pro, the vast majority end up somewhere else. They end up hating sports. They end up with damaged relationships with their parents. And for some kids, they end up with physical and emotional scars that last a lifetime. We have to end this great race to nowhere. We have to change the game in youth sports. We have to give it back to our kids. And today I want to tell you how we can do that. Now, some people say to me, oh, John, are you the anti-competitive guy? Trophies for everyone, no keeping score, no standings? Not at all. That is not me. I don't believe in participation awards. I don't think every kid who shows up should get a trophy just for doing the bare minimum. And as far as being competitive, I spent the last 20 years coaching elite youth soccer players. I spent 4 of those years as a Division I college men's soccer coach. So I know a little something about competitive athletes. And what I saw on that 10-year-old boys game, and what I see in so many sports all around the country, that is not it. These kids aren't becoming more competitive. They're not becoming better. They're becoming bitter. And they're dropping out of sports, 7 out of 10 of them. Now, what we've come to accept is this new environment in youth sports would never be acceptable anywhere else in life. We'd never accept it in our workplace. We'd never tolerate if our teachers treated our kids like this. And we would certainly never tolerate it if our children treated us in our events like we treat them. Can you imagine what that would feel like in your golf game or your tennis match if our children treated us? Well, our friends at Hockey Canada, they've imagined such a thing. Check it out.
Come on, Dad, focus. Widen your stance a little. Don't slouch. And don't screw up. This is the big league. What are you doing? Keep running the ball. That was pathetic. That was sort of funny.
Does anyone need that kind of help in their golf game? No. Awesome. So if we're going to change youth sports in this country, the first thing we have to remember is why children play. Now, Michigan State University did a huge study on this, about 30,000 kids. And they asked them, why do you play?
most ancestry tests, the best you can hope for is a bunch of wishy-washy pie charts with a list of places.
Teach, and what I want to teach you today is something I learned about 10 years ago from a man who's become a great friend and mentor. His name's Coach Bruce Brown. And it's just 5 simple words. I love watching you play. I love watching you play changes everything for your kids. Because what it tells them is that your love for them does not depend on whether they win or lose or how they perform. Now, I know this might seem very simple, but it's incredibly, incredibly powerful. I want to tell you the story of Peter Smith. Peter's a former professional tennis player. He's the men's coach at USC. He's won 4 national championships in over 500 matches. And Peter, when we crossed paths, he came to me and he said he was struggling because he's...
Can you guys hear the video now?
We can hear it, just can't see it.
You can't see it. I am so sorry. I didn't realize it was a problem. I'm very sorry about that. I think since you're having trouble seeing and trouble hearing that, I'm just going to stop it. It is a very interesting video that you can go on Canvas and watch yourselves. You've got it about youth sports and how there's too much pressure in sports on young children. And one of the statistics he said is 7 out of 10 children are dropping out of sports. And so I apologize that you had 5 or 10 minutes there you couldn't see or hear. I should have checked the chat sooner. I apologize for that. But that's really chapter 5 in a nutshell. There was a lot of similarities with chapter 4. So I'm going to stop it here. And any questions about anything? Again, I'm sorry, that must have been excruciating to watch something you couldn't hear and see. And I don't know what happened there, but what we'll do is we're going to sign off for now. And Tuesday, enjoy your day off, rest. And Thursday, we will come back and we will talk about chapter 6. And so I'm sure between now and Thursday, I'll send you an email. Don't forget to do your forum. And don't forget to keep up with your readings. And thanks for hanging in there today. I know that especially with the overcast mood of being snowed in and stuff, I'm sure it was kind of hard to listen today. I'm so sorry, but we'll be back in the saddle again next week. And you guys have a great weekend, okay?
Have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
I'm not